There are worlds that shine, and then there is Trantor, a planet so vast, so consumed by its own perfection, that even the stars beyond its sky seemed to orbit it in reverence. For 12,000 years, Trantor stood as the glittering heart of the Galactic Empire, a city that swallowed an entire world. From pole to pole, its surface was forged of metal and glass, a labyrinth of towers, domes, and endless corridors of power. The planet's oceans had long ago been drained, its mountains leveled, its soil entombed beneath layers of civilization. They called it the capital of humanity, but in truth, it had become its prison. In the beginning, there was a dream, a promise that one world could rule the stars with reason, law, and unity. The dream succeeded. For centuries, peace spread across millions of planets. The Empire brought light to the dark corners of the galaxy, binding worlds with trade and language and technology. Every life, every invention, every thought flowed through Trantor's veins. But the same arteries that carried its lifeblood carried its decay. Every empire believes it will last forever. Trantor believed this more than most. How could it not? When you are the center of everything, how can you imagine the universe continuing without you? And yet, this was the paradox at the heart of the city. The higher it rose, the deeper its foundations sank into rot. Imagine standing on the observation deck of the Imperial Palace below you, a sea of silver domes glinting like a field of stars. Above you, the planetary shield, tinted faint gold by the unfiltered sun. Trantor never slept. Its surface pulsed with light, 1 billion windows, 1 billion stories. Every second, 10,000 ships landed or departed, feeding the insatiable hunger of bureaucracy. The scent of ozone filled the air. The sound of turbines throbbed beneath your feet. The atmosphere was sterile, too clean, too perfect, as if nature had been politely erased. This was civilization's peak, its perfection, and its doom. Because while the towers of power reached ever higher, the people below began to forget what lay beyond. The metal generations were born and died without seeing an open sky. They spoke of fields and rivers as myths, quaint stories from the time before the city. They did not notice the walls tightening. They did not see the silence growing. In the Imperial Library, beneath a dome larger than any cathedral ever built on Earth, a scholar once whispered, "When a world forgets what freedom feels like, it ceases to live, it only continues to function." The function was flawless, until it wasn't. History has a cruel rhythm. Every empire, Rome, Byzantium, Britain, America, believes it has transcended the mistakes of the past. That technology, bureaucracy, or sheer scale will save it from decline. But entropy is patient. It waits in the margins, feeding on arrogance. On Trantor, corruption was not a scandal. It was a system. Senators sold favors as easily as air. Officials spent lifetimes managing forms that no one read. Armies were raised not for conquest, but for ceremony. The machinery of empire kept turning, even when no one was steering it. And deep beneath the surface, in maintenance tunnels that stretched for kilometers, a few still remembered the truth. Steel can corrode, light can dim, even stars can die. Yet still, Trantor dazzled. To the visiting merchant from the outer rim, it was paradise. Automated transports gliding silently through corridors of light, servants shaped from cloned perfection, imperial guards with eyes like cold glass. To the senators, it was heaven, a place where policy could move galaxies. To the ordinary worker, it was simply home. They did not question the Empire's eternity, because the alternative was unthinkable. No one could imagine a galaxy without Trantor until a single man did. His name was Hari Seldon, a mathematician from Helicon, and he brought with him a heresy unlike any religion had ever dared, that the Empire was dying and that the fall could be predicted. He did not speak of rebellion or war. He spoke of equations, curves of inevitability, probabilities of despair. Psychohistory, he called it. It was a science of humanity itself, not of individuals, but of masses, predicting the behavior of civilizations with mathematical precision. And according to Seldon's calculations, Trantor would fall, not in millennia, not in centuries, but within 300 years. Imagine the silence when he first said it aloud. A single voice echoing through a world that had forgotten how to listen. The imperial court laughed. The emperor smiled politely. But Seldon did not smile because he had seen the numbers. He had seen that the collapse, once begun, would last 30,000 years. A dark age spanning the entire galaxy. Worlds would burn, knowledge would be lost, humanity would revert to barbarism. Unless someone, acted to shorten the fall. This is where our story begins, in the twilight of greatness. Trantor still shines, its towers are still bright, its people still believe in the myth of eternity. But in the alleys beneath the towers, whispers have begun. Bureaucrats grow restless, military governors at the edges of the galaxy are acting without orders. Trade routes falter, the outer provinces murmur of independence. The heartbeat of the empire skips, once, twice, unnoticed. And in a quiet office on the university district's 27th tier, a man with tired eyes writes equations that could change the fate of civilization itself. The paradox grows heavier. How can something so magnificent, so vast, die from within? How can the city that ruled 1,000,000 worlds crumble without a single bomb falling from the sky? Perhaps the answer lies not in the stars, but in the human heart. Trantor's brilliance blinded it, its arrogance sealed it, and its perfection became the weapon of its destruction. This is not only the story of a city, it is the story of civilization itself, of power and pride, of destiny and decay. And maybe, just maybe, it's the story of us. Because when we look at Trantor's lights, at its towers, its crowds, its impossible scale, we are not seeing a distant fiction. We are seeing a reflection of our own world. A planet bathed in digital light, ruled by invisible systems, convinced of its permanence. But history never forgets. Every empire burns. Every light flickers. And when Trantor finally falls, it will not be with an explosion. It will fall with a whisper that begins here. The fall of Trantor, the capital that burned the galaxy. It began, as all empires do, with fire. Not the fire of destruction, but of ambition. 12,000 years before the fall, the scattered descendants of Earth reached out into the void, binding system after system under a single banner, the empire of humanity. From the shattered colonies of the periphery to the glittering core, world after world surrendered not to conquest, but to inevitability. Trantor, a modest agricultural planet at the time, sat at the perfect crossroads of trade and power. The first emperors chose it as their capital. From that day forward, no sun would rise without the empire's decree. They said the galaxy was too vast to govern, but the empire proved them wrong. A network of hyper-relays stitched the stars together like veins in a living organism. Armies of bureaucrats codified laws that spanned light years. Science became doctrine. Order became faith. And at the center of it all, Trantor, the beating heart, the world that fed on worlds. At first it was a wonder the city grew like a living thing. Layer upon layer, century upon century. Mountains were leveled, seas drained, forests erased. In their place rose towers of durasteel and crystal, platforms that touched the edge of the atmosphere, and power conduits that glowed like arteries beneath its metallic skin. By the third millennium, Trantor's surface was sealed completely. A planet-sized machine of governance agriculture moved underground. Energy came from the captured heart of its sun. From orbit, Trantor shimmered like a silver sphere, a second star illuminating the void. Its construction became legend, 1,000 years of ceaseless labor, with every world of the empire contributing materials, technology, or manpower. When the last open field was buried under steel, the emperor at the time, Cleon I, declared, "The soil of Trantor shall never again be trodden by naked feet." He was right, and that was the beginning of the end. But for millennia, no one saw the danger. They saw only the glory. From Trantor's endless halls, decisions were made that affected 1,000,000 worlds. The imperial palace alone was the size of a continent, a maze of spires, gardens and chambers where sons were bought and sold through politics and persuasion. The emperor's word could alter the destiny of species. The imperial library grew to contain the sum of human knowledge, a monument to memory itself. Historians claimed that if every other world were to vanish, civilization could be rebuilt from Trantor's archives alone. The empire's legions enforced peace so absolute that entire generations lived without hearing the word war. They called it the Pax Trantorica, the golden age of man. And yet, golden ages have a way of dulling the senses, of convincing the rulers that the music will play forever. For a time, it did. Trade flowed, prosperity expanded. Trantor's population reached 40 billion, all devoted, directly or indirectly, to the functioning of the state. Each sunrise was a declaration of triumph, each sunset a hymn to permanence. But beneath the anthem of progress, a quieter note began to hum, almost imperceptible, a vibration of fatigue. The empire had grown too large to understand itself. Provinces obeyed laws written by men who had never seen their worlds. Governors ruled as kings, communication lagged, corruption spread, and every decree took longer to travel across the void. Yet Trantor believed itself eternal. It was Rome in marble, Byzantium in code, the United Nations of 1,000,000,000 years hence. No one, not even its enemies, could imagine its fall. Because how can a god imagine death? Every empire in history has whispered the same phrase. This time, it's different. And every one of them has been wrong. The first Galactic Empire reached its zenith, and unseen began to die. But no one felt the tremor yet. The lights of Trantor still burn too brightly to see the shadows forming at their feet. Picture it, Trantor at its height. You step onto the observation promenade of the central hub, a corridor of glass that curves across the sky like a transparent vein beneath you, a panorama of living machinery. Maglev trains shimmer through the haze like veins of light. Airships drift between towers, their engines humming with almost musical precision. The air smells faintly of ozone, lubricant, and recycled rain. The temperature never changes. The day never truly ends. Every sound, every whisper of energy is part of a single planetary symphony. You look up and see not the stars, but the faint golden sheen of the planetary shield that protects Trantor from micrometeorites and the solar wind. To the citizens below, that barrier is the sky. The universe beyond it is theoretical, a curiosity, not a home. The people here live in layers, strata of class and function. Above the palaces of the nobility, each floating garden suspended by anti-grav fields. Below, the endless warrens of workers, administrators and servants, hundreds of levels deep, where no sunlight has touched for thousands of years, and yet ask any of them and they will say the same. We live in the greatest city in history. Trantor's efficiency was worshipped like a god. Every second of every life was part of a schedule. Meals were distributed by drones, sanitation was automated, time was currency. The bureaucracy extended to the smallest details. Even dreams were monitored through neural interfaces to optimize productivity. Children were raised to become clerks, analysts, data technicians, cogs in a machine so vast that even rebellion had been automated out of them. The illusion of perfection was complete. No hunger, no war, no chaos, only order. But what is order if not a form of silence? Beneath the surface calm, tension simmered. The outer worlds complained of overtaxation. Starship engineers spoke of shortages in materials once considered limitless. Energy consumption rose faster than production. But such problems were buried in reports, layered beneath centuries of bureaucracy. No one noticed, or rather, no one cared, because Trantor was beautiful, and beauty is the last refuge of the dying. From the Senate towers, where holographic stars flickered above marble floors, to the vast data chambers of the Imperial Archives, everything gleamed with purpose. Yet it was a hollow gleam, the reflection of something that no longer existed. Historians on modern Earth might compare it to the late Roman Empire, when the Colosseum still stood, but the legions were mercenaries, or to the twilight of the British Raj, when the empire's maps were still pink, but its heart had gone gray. In our world, the skyscrapers of New York, the digital towers of Silicon Valley, the steel cities of Shanghai, all echo Trantor's dream. We too have buried nature beneath technology, believing the hums of our servers is the song of eternity. But entropy has no fear of progress. It waits, and Trantor, for all its splendor, was running out of time. Down in the lower maintenance decks, where the great turbines roared like sleeping gods, the air was thick with heat and grease. Workers toiled beside plasma conduits that glowed with lethal light. They joked, they sweated, they slept in metal dormitories, generations who had never seen the stars. They were the lungs of the planet, forgotten by the minds above. But even there, in the noise and steam, whispers traveled that shipments were late, that certain sectors were shutting down without explanation, that the Emperor's edicts contradicted one another. Something unseen was fracturing. The machine of empire was beginning to misfire, and on Trantor even the smallest malfunction could echo across the stars. The Empire's grandeur was built by hands. Let's meet a few. Lyra Danzig, sanitation engineer, Sector 1173. Every morning she stood before the recycler vents and watched the city's waste vanish into plasma streams. Her grandmother had done the same job. Her daughter would too. She'd never seen a tree, but she'd memorized the schematics of every pipe in her zone. One day, one of those pipes burst. A small rupture, trivial by any measure, except it carried coolant from the planetary shield grid. The malfunction was reported, then reclassified, then lost in the endless channels of administrative review. 3 weeks later, a microsection of Trantor's shield failed for 6 seconds. No one noticed, but in orbit, a survey satellite burned to ash. The first crack. Ven Halor, clerk grade 47, worked in the Office of Imperial Logistics. He processed requests for agricultural imports, grain shipments from distant worlds. One morning, the shipments didn't arrive. He filed a complaint, then another, then another. Each response was identical, under review. Months passed. On the food distribution levels, synthetic rations replaced fresh imports. The official story claimed optimization. Ven saw the truth. The supply chains were failing, he told his superior. His superior smiled. The system is self-correcting, he said, but systems do not correct themselves. They collapse. Meanwhile, in the high towers of the Senate complex, a young noble named Avar Klee prepared his first address. Born into wealth, educated by the imperial academies, he believed deeply in the Empire's mission, to preserve order, to maintain the dream. As he walked to the podium, the lights flickered, a brief blackout, the first in his lifetime. It lasted only seconds, but when the lights returned, something shifted in him. He saw the senators' faces in that moment of darkness, not confidence, but fear. For the first time, Avar realized that even gods can be afraid of the dark. He delivered his speech flawlessly, but his voice trembled on the final line. The Empire endures. Did it? And in the university district, a mathematician named Hari Seldon stepped off a transport and gazed up at the skyline. He saw not beauty, but inevitability. To him, the city was a formula. Every tower, every citizen, every decision, a data point in an equation too vast for human eyes.
Where others saw power, he saw probability. Where others saw eternity, he saw entropy. He knew the pattern. He'd seen it in ancient texts, in Earth's forgotten empires, in the curves of history itself. Trantor had reached the summit, and there was only one direction left to go. As night fell across the metal world, billions of lights flickered on. The city glowed like a sun reborn. From orbit, it looked eternal. But deep within its circuits, something small, something human, had begun to stir. A question whispered in the minds of clerks and nobles alike. What if the empire could end? And once that question is asked, no empire can survive it. Trantor stands. For now, by the time the empire reached its 12th millennium, its greatness had turned inward, like a serpent consuming its own tail. The machinery of power still moved, but its motion was hollow, repetitive, ritualistic. Every law required a committee. Every committee required a quorum, and every quorum required permission from another office that had long since forgotten its purpose. Trantor was not collapsing. It was suffocating under its own weight. The empire still spanned 1,000,000 worlds, but the flow of knowledge and wealth had reversed. The outer provinces, once fountains of innovation and energy, now sent tribute to a capital that gave nothing in return. The frontier grew restless. Trade slowed. The bureaucracy thickened like dust over an abandoned monument. And at the center, the emperor still sat upon his throne, surrounded by courtiers who mistook ceremony for governance. It is a pattern as old as civilization itself. Rome, when it could no longer feed its legions. China, when its mandarins drowned reform in ink and parchment. The late United States, when its political machinery became so polarized that governance became theater. Each thought itself eternal. Each believed that wealth and culture could replace purpose. Each mistook motion for progress. Trantor was all of them, magnified to a galactic scale. In the vast Senate complex, hundreds of worlds petitioned daily for aid, agricultural relief, infrastructure repair, defense funding. The petitions moved up through layers of clerks, ministers, and councils until they disappeared entirely into the processing abyss. On paper, every problem had a solution. In reality, solutions never arrived, and the people learned to live without them. Economically, the rot was invisible at first. Credit flowed, taxes were collected. But fewer ships returned from the periphery each year. Supply convoys arrived months late. The empire's own currency, the imperial credit, began to falter in value trade guilds, secretly bartered with independent worlds, using metals, rare isotopes, even food. But on Trantor, the illusion of abundance persisted. Food was synthesized. Goods were recycled. Artificial skies glowed warm and constant, masking the decay below. The bureaucrats called this stability. Economists called it collapse in slow motion. And Hari Seldon, though still an obscure mathematician, would one day call it inevitability. History loves symmetry. The same forces that built the empire now conspired to unmake it. As Rome fell to corruption and complacency, as Britain's colonies turned to independence, so too did the worlds of the Outer Rim begin to murmur the Marin rebellions, the Ascone secession, the first sparks in the long dark of the periphery. And yet, even as the fires burned at the edges, Trantor's Senate debated the wording of its own resolutions. An empire does not die when its enemies strike. It dies when it can no longer feel the blow. For centuries, Trantor had been the galaxy's mind. Now, it was a brain deprived of oxygen, still functioning, still dreaming, but detached from the body that sustained it. The imperial bureaucracy had become a monument to inertia, and when empires slow, entropy quickens. Imagine standing in the lower maintenance decks of Trantor. The air is thick with heat and oil, filled with the ceaseless vibration of turbines that have not stopped in 10,000 years. The ground trembles, alive with power, but it is the power of exhaustion, the pulse of a heart too proud to admit it is failing. Steam curls around your ankles like ghosts, pipes rattle. Somewhere deep in the metal labyrinth, an unseen mechanism groans in protest. The citizens above never hear it. But the workers below do. They feel it in their bones. They call it the pulse, the living heartbeat of the planet, once steady, now irregular. It's said that when the pulse falters, the city shudders in its sleep. On the surface, everything still glows. The immaculate corridors, the hovering vehicles, the sterile perfection of the administrative towers. But closer inspection reveals the truth. The gloss is fading. You can smell rust even through the recycled air. You can see cracks forming in the walls where alloy meets alloy. Entire sectors are under temporary repair, though no one remembers when the repairs began. Automated drones sweep the streets, but some malfunction and wander aimlessly, brushing the same patch of floor for days until their power cells die. Citizens walk past them without noticing. They've learned to edit decay from their minds. To them, the empire still endures, because it must. But in the lower decks, where the light dims and the hum becomes a roar, the truth is harder to ignore. Here, the scent of burned metal never leaves your clothes. The air is warm and stale. Ventilation fans churn the same oxygen through endless ducts, rattling like a dying breath. You pass dormitories filled with sleeping workers, their bunks stacked 6 high. Their dreams broadcast silently on flickering hollow screens. The workers no longer dream of stars. They dream of quotas met, shifts completed, systems restored. Trantor has become a planet that dreams of itself, a machine so complete it no longer remembers its purpose. Outside the planetary shield, the galaxy glitters in silence. But from the surface, the stars are invisible, muted behind the metallic haze. Only the rich have access to simulated observatories, artificial skies projected on domes. For everyone else, the heavens are a rumor. Children learn about stars from history archives. They draw them on school tablets, bright dots against black backgrounds, like ancient cave paintings. Sometimes, when the shield flickers during maintenance, a handful of real stars appear for a few seconds. Crowds gather, staring upward, mesmerized. Then the shield resets, the stars vanish, and life continues. The workers call it the blink. It lasts only moments, but for some, it's enough to remember that there's something beyond the steel. The Empire's illusion of perfection is its greatest achievement and its greatest tragedy. In the Senate halls, marble floors still gleam under cold light. Holograms of 1,000,000 worlds rotate in serene beauty. Senators make speeches about unity and continuity. They do not see the decay they cannot. For to see it is to accept that the dream is ending. And so they continue day after day in an endless performance of stability. Meanwhile, deep below, the pulse grows weaker. If you listen closely, really listen, you can hear it, the slow shift of foundations, the moan of steel under strain. It sounds almost like breathing, almost like mourning, because Trantor, for all its grandeur, is alive, and like all living things, it knows when its end approaches. From a distance, the city still looks invincible. Up close, it's already dying. The cracks are spreading, not only through its walls, but through the hearts of its people. For the first time in centuries, citizens whisper words once thought extinct. Change. Freedom. Outside. They do not yet know what these words mean, but the stars, those forgotten fires, are waiting.
And soon, someone will give those whispers a voice. Thomas Venn worked in the Ministry of Planetary Revenue, Level 802. His job was to approve budget requisitions from a dozen outer rim sectors. Each form was the size of a novel, filled with data, signatures, and countersignatures. He had never seen any of the planets he funded. He barely remembered the names. To him, they were numbers, statistical abstractions, until one day, one of those worlds stopped transmitting. No signal, no request, no data. He filed a report. The system automatically closed it after 24 hours. Resolved, he tried again, same result. Finally, he stopped trying. He told himself the world didn't matter, but in his dreams, he saw it, a silent planet drifting in darkness, waiting for a reply that would never come. That was how empires died. Not in war, but in apathy. Far below, in the maintenance tunnels, Lyra Danzig, the same engineer who once patched coolant lines, had joined a group of workers who called themselves the Surface Guild. They claimed there were still patches of real soil somewhere deep beneath the infrastructure, ancient remnants from Trantor's pre-metal age. They dreamed of unsealing one just to touch the ground again. It was illegal, of course. Unauthorized excavation carried a death sentence, but they met anyway, gathering in the shadows, sharing fragments of old maps and forbidden stories. To touch the ground was blasphemy, but to forget it was worse. And then there was Merrick Halor, brother of Ven, a cargo pilot who ferried goods between the core and the periphery. He saw what Trantor refused to see. He saw the rebellion brewing, the neglected colonies, the ruined trade stations, the governors who no longer bowed to imperial decree. He returned home once a cycle, walking the sterile streets of Trantor, watching people queue for synthetic food, while news feeds broadcast endless triumphs. He told his brother, "The edges are falling apart." Ven just shook his head. "The reports say otherwise." "Then maybe the reports are lying." Ven smiled faintly. "Reports don't lie. People do." Neither spoke again of it. A year later, Merrick's ship vanished beyond the rim. Above them all, far from the maintenance tunnels and bureaucratic corridors, a rumor spread through the academic tiers of the university district. A visiting mathematician was giving lectures on something called psychohistory. No one quite understood it. Some said it was philosophy. Others said it was blasphemy. The idea was simple, terrifyingly simple. That the behavior of entire civilizations could be predicted, that the future of the empire could be written in numbers. The mathematician's name was whispered with curiosity and contempt. Hari Seldon. On the night he arrived, the pulse faltered. A brief tremor swept through the lower decks, shutting down transports, dimming lights. Citizens paused, uneasy. Then the systems reset, the hum returned, and the city continued as if nothing had happened. But those who listened, those who had felt that shudder deep in the steel, knew better. Something had changed. In a forgotten corner of the university's computational wing, Seldon unpacked his instruments. His hair was streaked with gray, his voice calm, his eyes distant, as though he were already watching the centuries ahead. When asked what his work sought to prove, he answered simply, that the empire cannot be saved. But humanity can. No one yet believed him, but soon they would have no choice. Because beneath the steel sky of Trantor, destiny had begun to take shape. The first cracks had opened. The pulse was weakening, and the future, dark, vast, inevitable, was already approaching. It began in silence. Not the silence of ignorance, but of revelation. In a dim hall beneath the university district, a man named Hari Seldon stood before a wall of glowing equations that pulsed like living constellations. Numbers drifted in air, connecting, recombining, resolving into shapes no human eye had ever seen. The equations were not simply mathematics, they were prophecy. For in their elegant geometry lay the fate of 1,000,000 worlds. Psychohistory was his creation, part science, part philosophy, part mirror to the human soul. It began as an extension of statistical mechanics, the mathematics of large numbers. If one could predict the motion of gas molecules by their averages, why not the motion of civilizations by their behaviors? It was madness, his peers said. It was blasphemy, said the Church of the Galactic Spirit. It was heresy against the imperial dream, but Hari Seldon did not seek faith or fame. He sought truth. He saw the empire not as a symbol, but as a system, vast, beautiful, decaying from within. Every function, every fluctuation, every bureaucratic delay was a variable in his equation, and the result was always the same.
collapse. Not in a year, not in a century, but within 500 years, inevitable, unstoppable, mathematical. He tested the equations against the archives of history. The pattern held: Rome, Byzantium, the Federation of Santani, the Solar Dominion, all had risen, peaked, and decayed in identical arcs. Entropy was not chaos, entropy was destiny. But where others saw despair, Seldon saw design. If the fall was inevitable, perhaps the rebuilding could be shaped. If humanity must descend into darkness, perhaps that darkness could be shortened, guided by the invisible hand of reason. From this seed grew the Seldon Plan, a roadmap not of conquest, but of survival. 1,000 years of chaos could be compressed into mere centuries. Civilization could be reborn before it was lost entirely. Seldon became both scientist and prophet. His followers, students, mathematicians, and visionaries, gathered in secret rooms, poring over equations as priests once pored over holy texts. Each number was a revelation, each variable a fragment of future history. They began to speak in the language of fate, probability distributions, socio-dynamic vectors, cultural inertia, and though Seldon never claimed divinity, the reverence in their eyes was unmistakable. But empires fear prophecy, especially when it predicts their end. Whispers of Seldon's work reached the ears of the Commission of Public Safety, the shadow that ruled behind the imperial throne. At first, they dismissed him as an eccentric academic. Then, as his followers multiplied and his equations spread, they labeled him dangerous. They summoned him to the imperial palace. Beneath the dome of artificial sunlight, surrounded by courtiers and guards, Seldon stood before Emperor Cleon I, the last of the strong emperors. "Your mathematics," the emperor said, "foretells doom. You would undermine the faith of 1 billion souls." Seldon replied calmly, "Majesty, mathematics does not undermine faith. It merely describes its decay." The court gasped. The emperor's smile did not waver. "You claim to see the future?" "No," said Seldon, "only its shape." They could have executed him that day, and the empire would have died in ignorance. But the emperor was not a fool. He ordered Seldon placed under observation and his research confined to Trantor. Thus began the Project Foundation. Publicly, it was a compendium, an Encyclopedia Galactica, a catalogue of human knowledge. Privately, it was Seldon's Ark, the seed from which the next civilization would bloom under imperial patronage. His followers worked in secret to preserve science, history, and art, not for the present, but for the future. After the fall, the prophecy had been written. The machinery of fate was in motion. And though few believed, those who did would shape the next 1,000 years. Science had become destiny. And Hari Seldon, reluctant prophet, had become the architect of eternity. The irony was not lost on him. The more his equations revealed, the less freedom he possessed. In the quiet hours of the night, surrounded by glowing graphs of probability curves, Seldon wondered, if the future is predictable, does that mean it is unchangeable? Was he saving humanity, or merely documenting its fall? The equations spoke with cruel clarity. Every attempt to prevent the empire's collapse only hastened it. Reform led to corruption. Decentralization led to anarchy. Control led to rebellion. Each variable balanced another, like a vast equation locked in self-correcting doom. The empire, he realized, was not a government. It was a thermodynamic system approaching equilibrium, a perfect stillness where progress ceased and decay dominated. To resist it was like trying to stop heat from dispersing, and yet, there was always the human factor. No equation could predict an individual, only the masses. No probability could encompass a single act of defiance, a flash of genius, a moment of love or sacrifice. In that narrow gap between prediction and uncertainty, free will survived. It was a thin thread, but it was enough. Seldon's students debated this endlessly. Some argued that psychohistory made freedom obsolete, that people were merely particles in a grand equation. Others saw it differently. Knowing the pattern, said one student, is not the same as being bound by it. To which Seldon replied, but if the pattern predicts your rebellion, was it ever rebellion at all? The hall fell silent. Even he could not answer. Outside, Trantor's sky pulsed with the dull red of the planetary shield. From the upper levels, you could almost forget that the world was wrapped in metal, that no real sun had touched its soil in 10,000 years. Inside, the hum of computation filled the room. Equations updated themselves, flowing across walls like tides. One of Seldon's assistants remarked, "It's almost alive." Seldon smiled faintly. Perhaps it is. The universe itself is an algorithm, endlessly computing its own future. There was talk, too, of machines that think, early versions of self-correcting intelligences capable of processing the psychohistorical data faster than any human mind. Some feared them. Some worshipped them. Seldon saw only reflection. Artificial intelligence is not dangerous because it thinks. It is dangerous because it believes it understands. He paused, then added softly, as do we. Psychohistory, AI, empire, all were mirrors of the same truth, the illusion of control. Civilizations, like individuals, cling to certainty. They mistake prediction for mastery. But the future cannot be owned. It can only be endured. That was the essence of his plan, to accept what could not be stopped, to prepare for what could not be avoided. It was not faith. It was not hope. It was mathematics, cold, beautiful, merciless. And yet it was also mercy, because within the cruelty of inevitability lay the only path to salvation. The day of reckoning came sooner than expected. Rumors of rebellion had reached the core. The periphery burned. Trade routes collapsed. The Senate declared new taxes. The provinces declared independence. Trantor trembled, not from bombs or battles, but from the realization that its control was fading, and through it all, Hari Seldon stood calm. His models had predicted this moment with uncanny precision. It was time. He was brought before the imperial tribunal, accused of treason and sedition. The chamber was vast and cold, filled with senators, generals, and bureaucrats who had never left Trantor's surface. Seldon bowed his head slightly, then spoke. "My lords, you accuse me of spreading fear, yet fear already reigns. You accuse me of conspiracy, yet conspiracy is born of ignorance. I have not condemned the empire, only measured it. And the measure is clear. Within 5 centuries, Trantor will fall." The hall erupted in outrage. The chief commissioner struck his staff upon the floor. "Blasphemy," he thundered. "The empire is eternal." Seldon's voice was quiet but firm. So said every empire before this one. The trial became spectacle news feeds across the galaxy broadcast his words. Half the population called him a traitor. The other half called him a prophet. Finally, the verdict was read. Exile. He and his followers would be banished to the remote world of Terminus at the very edge of the galaxy to continue their encyclopedia project under supervision. The Empire believed it was punishment. Seldon knew it was the beginning. On the eve of departure, he gathered his followers in the great computational hall. The lights dimmed. Equations glowed faintly on the walls, shimmering like starlight through fog. He addressed them one last time. "Do not mourn the Empire. Its death was written long before we arrived. What we build on Terminus is not an escape. It is a seed. From it will grow a second empire, wiser than the first. You will be the memory of humanity." He paused, eyes distant. "There will be suffering. There will be centuries of darkness, but the light will return, because it always does. The mathematics assures it." The hall was silent. Only the hum of the machines remained. The next day, the ships lifted off. Thousands watched from Trantor's upper decks, silent, uncertain. The Foundation was leaving, carrying within it the hope of millennia. As the fleet vanished into the black, Trantor itself seemed to tremble, the pulse faltering once more. Deeper this time, Seldon's equations had spoken true. The first rebellion was already beginning, and far away, on a lonely planet at the edge of the galaxy, the future was waiting to be born. It began as whispers in the corridors of power, soft, uncertain, easily ignored. Outer provinces refusing tribute, fleets defecting to warlords, governors proclaiming autonomy in the name of stability. The bureaucracy responded with memos, the generals with silence, and then the stars began to go dark. The last Imperial admirals stationed across the spiral arms reported communications failures, entire sectors gone quiet. What they did not know, what Trantor refused to admit, was that the silence was not from broken transmitters. It was from burning worlds. The Empire had stretched itself too far for too long. A civilization that spanned 1,000,000 suns was now reduced to fragments of loyalty and fear. The core still gleamed, but its light no longer reached the rim. The sack of Trantor did not happen in a single night. Like Rome, it decayed for decades before the final blow. There had been omens, shortages, riots, collapsing trade routes, each treated as temporary inconvenience. The Senate dismissed them as regional disturbances. The emperors, now little more than hereditary symbols, sat in ornamental thrones beneath the domes of artificial daylight. They ruled a shadow of an empire, an echo pretending to be eternity, and still they believed themselves safe. After all, Trantor had never been invaded. How could it be? It was the center of everything, a world encased in steel, layered in defense grids, surrounded by the most powerful fleet ever assembled, but the enemy did not come from without. It came from within. A general named Gilmer, once loyal to the throne, turned his fleet toward Trantor. His rebellion began in the periphery, fueled by starving colonies and forgotten soldiers. He claimed he would restore the Empire's purity. In truth, he sought power. History always does. As his forces advanced, sector after sector fell, not through conquest, but through surrender. No one wanted to die for an empire that no longer fed them. The Imperial Navy, once a force of 1,000,000 ships, fractured. Admirals betrayed admirals. Governors switched sides mid-transmission. By the time Gilmer's fleet entered the core systems, there was no resistance left to meet him. Trantor's sky turned red as the shields came alive for the first time in centuries. The sight was magnificent, the planet glowing beneath its own armor, every dome reflecting the light of defensive fire. But beauty is often the mask of death. Missiles rained from orbit. The first layers of the city buckled. The great agricultural domes, once the lungs of the planet, ruptured, spilling fire into the lower levels. For the first time in 10,000 years, Trantor burned. Historians of later centuries would compare it to the sack of Rome in 410 AD, or the fall of Constantinople in 1453, moments when worlds ended not with apocalypse, but exhaustion. A superpower collapsing beneath its own weight. Trantor was no different. Its people had forgotten how to fight. Its rulers had forgotten how to lead. Its faith was not in gods or kings, but in systems, and systems, when corrupted, cannot pray for mercy. The capital of the galaxy, the city that had ruled 1,000,000 worlds, was now a graveyard of ambition, and as flames consumed its towers, the echo of Seldon's words seemed to drift through the smoke. The mathematics assures it. The Empire was dying. The long night had begun, but amid the ruin, far beyond the core, the plans still whispered. The air tasted of iron. Every breath carried the scent of molten steel and ozone. From the highest towers to the lowest sectors, Trantor was a symphony of collapse. The hum of machinery, once steady and godlike, now became a scream of ruptured circuits, a requiem in metal. Above the city, the sky flickered with shattered shields. Below, the people, billions of them, fled through tunnels that had not seen light in generations. They ran toward rumors that the lower levels were safe, that the hydro stations still worked, that someone, anyone, still had food. But there was no safety. Trantor was eating itself. The once sterile streets were now rivers of ash. Maglev trains derailed mid-transit. tumbling through the air like dying beasts. The noise was endless. Collapsing towers, wailing alarms, the crack of atmospheric ruptures as domes failed one by one. The city that had never slept now screamed itself awake. And through it all, the Empire still issued decrees, emergency orders, population directives, evacuation protocols, as though bureaucracy could govern fire. In the Ministry of Statistics, a clerk continued to file reports even as the ceiling caved in. When rescuers found his body days later, his data slate still glowed with his final entry: census incomplete due to civic instability. From orbit, Trantor looked like a dying star, a planet-sized ember glowing in the dark. Its oceans of metal burned orange. Its defense grid pulsed in chaotic spasms. The invaders did not need to destroy it. They simply watched it fall apart. Gilmer's men descended through the broken shields, looting what remained: libraries, databanks, archives. Centuries of knowledge erased in hours. And yet, for all their greed, they too would vanish soon enough. Rebels become tyrants, tyrants become dust. As the fires spread, the palace domes collapsed. The Imperial Library, once the most complete collection of human knowledge in history, fell into silence. The heat was so intense that the crystal memory cores melted into glass. 1,000 years of data, gone in a heartbeat. And with it, the illusion of permanence. Trantor's people had believed themselves eternal. They built towers that touched the stratosphere, cities that spanned continents. They paved over oceans and turned the sky into circuitry. But beneath that perfection lay rot, unseen, unspoken, inevitable. It is the same illusion every empire suffers. Rome had its marble, Byzantium its gold, America its screens and algorithms. Each believed itself immune to history. Each forgot the law that governs all systems. Entropy spares no empire. In the final hours, when the fires reached the planetary core, the pulse, the rhythmic vibration that had always filled Trantor's air, finally stopped. The silence was terrifying. It was the first true silence the planet had heard in 10,000 years. The hum of power, the murmur of voices, the machinery of eternity, all gone. Only wind remained, a dry, hollow sound echoing through a world of steel and ghosts. If arrogance has a sound, it is silence after collapse. In the ruins of Sector 92, a boy named Torin picked his way through the rubble. He had never seen the sky before the fires came. Now above him, the atmosphere shimmered with the pale light of distant stars. They said the stars were myths, but myths had survived where the Empire had not. Torin scavenged through what had been the Hall of Records, now just twisted metal and the smell of burnt plastic. He found a data crystal, cracked but glowing faintly. On it, a fragment of text. The Encyclopedia Galactica, Foundation Edition. He did not understand the words, but he kept it anyway. Elsewhere, in the shadow of a collapsed dome, a woman whispered into a transmitter, one of the few still working. Her name was Lyra Dane, once a technician for the Imperial Communications Bureau. Her voice was hoarse but steady. If anyone can hear this, Trantor has fallen. The capital is gone. The grid is offline. We are alone. A pause. Static. But the foundations endure. I've traced the signals. Out on the rim, beyond the core. They're still transmitting. They're still planning. Then silence. Her words vanished into space, but somewhere, light years away, someone heard them. Weeks passed. The fires died. The air cleared. The survivors began to rebuild. Not towers, not cities, but gardens. They tore open the steel plates to expose the ancient soil beneath, black and strange but fertile. Children planted seeds where skyscrapers once stood. For the first time in 10,000 years, rain fell on naked earth. Trantor was becoming a world again. It would never again be the capital of the galaxy. Its towers would crumble. Its name would fade into legend. But in time, travelers would come, pilgrims, historians, dreamers, walking among its ruins, listening for echoes of the past. And they would find them, The pulse would never return, but in the wind and the rustling of new leaves, one could almost hear its ghost, the rhythm of a planet that had once ruled the stars. 1,000 years later, the historians of the Second Empire would record the fall in solemn tones. Trantor, jewel of the First Galactic Empire, was sacked by internal rebellion and left in ruin. Its population fell from 40 billion to a few hundred million. Its metal crust was torn open to the sky, yet from its ashes the plan endured. Because far away, on Terminus, the Foundation had grown strong, traders, scientists, rulers in their own right, and beyond even them, in the shadows of the galaxy, the Second Foundation watched and waited. The Empire had fallen. But the idea of empire, the dream of order, knowledge, and destiny, still lived on. The city of 1 billion lights was gone, but its embers glowed in the hearts of those who remembered. And one day, long after Trantor's ruins had turned to dust, its name would rise again, not as a warning, but as a beginning. Because history does not end, it only changes shape. The galaxy burned, not with a single fire, but with 1 million small ones, scattered across the spiral arms, devouring worlds, igniting rebellions, consuming the last fragile embers of order. Trantor was gone. The First Empire, 12,000 years of civilization, bureaucracy, and faith in permanence, lay in ruins. From the ashes rose silence. And then, whispers of something new. Far out on the galactic rim, on a lonely world called Terminus, the First Foundation stirred. Its people, the descendants of Hari Seldon's exiles, stood beneath alien skies, watching the faint light of the core flicker and die. They had no armies, no fleets, no throne, but they had knowledge. And knowledge, Seldon had once said, was the most powerful weapon in the universe. So they waited, not as mourners, but as midwives to a new age. The world they built was small, fragile, poor in resources, but its libraries thrummed with living data. Its engineers crafted machines not of war, but of preservation. Its leaders were not emperors, but scientists, traders, and thinkers. They had seen what empire did to the soul. They would not repeat it. Or so they believed. In time, the Foundation became more than an archive. It became a beacon, a nexus of trade, religion, and diplomacy, spreading influence not by conquest, but by necessity. Surrounding worlds, desperate for technology and order, turned to it for help. The Foundation gave them answers, and in exchange, it gained allegiance. Knowledge became currency. Faith became governance. Trade became empire. A quiet empire, one that ruled not by fear, but by inevitability. And yet, even as the plan unfolded with near-perfect precision, cracks appeared in its symmetry. Seldon's holographic recordings continued to appear at the appointed times, predicting each crisis with mathematical calm. But behind the calm was uncertainty, because psychohistory, for all its brilliance, had one flaw. It could not predict the individual. And in time, an individual would appear who would defy it all, but not yet. For now, the plan held. Across the void, hidden among the stars, lay the Second Foundation, invisible, unknowable, born of mind rather than metal. They were the true guardians of Seldon's vision, the invisible shepherds guiding the plan through chaos. Where the First Foundation ruled the physical, the Second ruled the psychological. Where one preserved knowledge, the other preserved balance. They lived in secret, their existence known to almost no one, not even the rulers of Terminus. But they watched. They always watched, for the plan was fragile, and humanity unpredictable. Between the two foundations, the galaxy entered its twilight worlds, fell and rose again. Civilizations reinvented themselves. The long night that Seldon had foreseen, 30,000 years of barbarism, would now last only 1,000. And when it ended, a second empire would rise, not from conquest, but from the union of knowledge and understanding. At least, that was the vision. But visions, like empires, are only human. Centuries passed. The first foundation grew arrogant, believing itself the true heir of destiny. Its traders became princes. Its scientists became rulers. The old cycle began anew. Power breeds pride. Pride breeds blindness. Blindness breeds collapse. History, it seemed, was not a straight line. It was a spiral, each turn echoing the last, forever repeating in new forms. On a distant world, a historian recorded these words for the Encyclopedia Galactica. Empires are not measured by their armies or their monuments, but by their memory. The empire of Trantor died, but its dream endures, reshaped, reframed, reborn. For even as we fall, we build. In the ruins of Trantor, life returned, the steel plates were gone, the earth breathed again, grass grew where metal once reigned. Children played beneath an open sky their ancestors had never seen. They no longer called themselves citizens of the empire. They called themselves survivors of the dawn. From orbit, the planet was beautiful again, scarred but alive. Not the sterile perfection of a machine, but the rough, chaotic beauty of rebirth. Perhaps that was what Seldon had meant all along, that the fall was not failure but necessity, that humanity could only learn by breaking. Because only through collapse could we understand the meaning of what we lost. And yet, even now, the equations continued to evolve. Somewhere, deep in the archives of the Second Foundation, minds of extraordinary power recalculated the probabilities. The plan wavered. Unseen variables emerged. They saw it, a shadow forming at the edge of history, a mutation, a mind unlike any other, an anomaly that could not be predicted, could not be controlled. The galaxy would know him by one name, the Mule, but that is another story. For now, the camera pulls back, rising above the ruins of Trantor, above the flickering lights of the rim, above the spiral arms of a galaxy both dying and reborn. 1,000 worlds smolder, 1,000 more ignite. Between them, two foundations burn quietly, not with fire, but with purpose. They are humanity's last insurance against oblivion and perhaps its first step towards transcendence. In the end, the empire did not fall because it was weak. It fell because it was human. Because every civilization, no matter how vast, is built on faith. Faith that tomorrow will resemble today. Faith that systems will endure. Faith that the center will hold. But faith is not science. And even psychohistory cannot save us from ourselves. The galaxy spins on. Empires rise, empires fall. Equations are rewritten. History forgets and remembers again. And somewhere, light years away, on a small blue world orbiting an ordinary star, another civilization builds its towers of glass and code. They call it progress. They call it eternal. But in the hum of their machines, in the glow of their cities, if one listens closely enough, one can almost hear the pulse. The same pulse that once beat beneath the metal sky of Trantor. The same illusion of permanence, the same promise of empire, because the cycle never ends, it only waits. And so we must ask, as every age must, the question Hari Seldon left for us all. If every empire must fall, can even our own world escape the same fate?